Much that was once played is lost, for none now roll who remember it. It began with the printing of the One Ring tabletop RPG. Supplements were given to the game masters, all-knowing and wisest among all beings. Adventures were handed to the Tolkienites, great writers and fans of the books. And promise of expansions were gifted to the players, who above all else desire chaos. For within this game was bound the creativity and will to govern each table. But they were all of them left waiting, for a second edition was never made. And some things that should not have been neglected were paused. History became legend became meme, and for 3,500 days the One Ring RPG passed out of most knowledge. Until, when chance came, it ensnared a new publisher. Rumor grew of an alliance in the north, whispers of a partnership. And the One Ring RPG perceived that the time for its second edition had now come. In the land of Sweden, in the welcoming halls of Free League Games, plans for the second edition were forged not in secret, but on Kickstarter for all to see. And it was funded in 4 minutes, and beat all of its initial stretch goals in the first hour.
Well, hello there, terrible warriors, and welcome to a very special Meet the Makers. We haven't done one of those in a while. Happening right now, at the time that this podcast is released, is the One Ring RPG Kickstarter by Free League Games. They're partnering up for the second edition of the One Ring RPG, the only officially licensed Lord of the Rings RPG. And I got a very wonderful opportunity to speak to legendary game designer Francesco Nepitello, the co-creator of the One Ring RPG, and also behind the War of the Ring board game. And Francesco was able to take a little bit of time away from his very busy day to be able to sit down and talk to us about the One Ring in the midst of the Kickstarter campaign as it's happening. And it was interesting, as I was getting ready to talk to him and I was telling friends about this upcoming interview and about this Kickstarter and about the One Ring, quite a lot of them were surprised when I said that this was the second edition of the One Ring. They weren't even aware that there was a first edition that had come out in 2011. So I opened my conversation up with Francesco to ask him about that. Was he surprised to find so many people discovering the One Ring for the first time, even though this is supposedly the second time around?
Even if we already had a first edition that was out for quite a few years now and spawning multiple supplements and even a parallel line using D&D 5e rules, is that for some reasons we were quite sure that the popularity of the game just scratched the surface, didn't really went beyond a certain level of recognizability. We tried to understand what happened, why it was the case, but eventually we decided that Kickstarter in the first place was not very much about funding the game, but because we were sure that we would be selling the game anyway, even if it was on a regular pre-order. But what we wanted to do with Kickstarter was to, use the hype machine that Kickstarter is to get more attention towards the game. And it seems that what you tell me, it's exactly the case, that people that is coming to the game now never heard of it before. There might be multiple reasons.
Yeah, I mentioned the One Ring to a friend over the weekend, and it was just like this all caps response of like, how soon? When can we start playing this? This is amazing. And you mentioned the hype machine. I just clicked over to that Kickstarter page. We still got 16 days to go, and I mean, it's sitting at $1.2 million Canadian right now. And every time I talk, it ticks up another $1,000 every couple of seconds. So I guess the hype machine is working.
Yeah, exactly. Now that as we were talking in this exact moment, it crossed the 800,000 euros line.
That's phenomenal.
So for us here in Europe, it's something that, okay.
And it's such a good time. I felt like during the pandemic, everyone has just, it's never been a better time to sit down and watch those extended edition movies and dive back into Tolkien. Like everything's kind of had to slow down just a little bit. We're a little bit more bored. We've got a little bit more time sitting at home, and so many, I mean, myself included, sat down and just went right back to Lord of the Rings all over again. And then this game just comes out. Technically for the second time, but for many of us the first time, and it just seems like it's just so well timed.
Yeah, I think that also we all have a physical need for interaction, and Kickstarter sits in such a privileged position where a campaign like this one is like getting together with like-minded people, because I see from the comments that even the negative ones, even people that is complaining about this or that thing, are happy to be engaged with other people with the same interest, because we cannot go to the club and meet people and play face to face and stuff like that. So Kickstarter is not simply a pre-order. It's something that gives you a sort of a social experience that makes it all the more worthwhile. You really are a part of making this thing happen.
Yeah, we're really starving. We're really hungry for more community right now.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
having any moment there where we can have that kind of connection and to just be able to indulge in both a love of a shared hobby and also a love of a shared world, like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Francesco, I did want to talk a bit, because technically this series that you and I are talking on is called Meet the Makers. And so I'd like to get to know you as well. I understand you've been part of the One Ring for since its beginning and through its iterations, and now into its second edition with Free League. But what was it for you that brought you to tabletop role playing in the first place, and then later as a designer of these games? What hooked you?
I was lucky to grow up in a family with we're three brothers, and we always played together. We were also lucky to have a small garden. I live in Venice, so I don't know if you visited the city, but houses are usually small. Having a garden is very much of a luxury. Even if probably if you saw the garden I'm talking about, you will not consider it a garden because it's very small. But when you're young, when you're just a kid, everything looks so much bigger. So it was our playground. We played all sorts of games, and being three boys, we also played a lot of board games and war games. So I came to role-playing games very early on. We're talking about the early years of the 80s, when D&D was really, blossoming as a type of a hobby. And we were already playing similar stuff because we came from fantasy and science fiction war games. We were very keen in playing that type of thing. So I have an older brother, and he was the rules lawyer all the time. He invented the games when I was smaller, when I was about 8-10 years old. And so we always had this idea that games were supposed to be customized, were supposed to be changed to suit your tastes, or even to be invented from the ground up, because we for example, were playing games using toy soldiers or plastic animals, using rules that we devised. So it was very much of a sort of a normal, organic progression to start inventing games and thinking about doing something about it from a professional point of view. And that's when luck had another part, because of all places in Venice lived one of the most prolific game designers ever. Alex Randolph was a board game designer that designed more than 400 titles. And he's considered possibly the one to invent the profession of game designer, to be someone who just lives off designing games. He was originally from Texas and lived then all over the world, lived in Japan, and then ended up living in Venice for more than 30 years. So a small community grew up around Alex and around a Go club, and then a chess club, and then a backgammon club. And I met him and the people around his group when they started being interested in role-playing games too. It was a time when tournaments for D&D, the original D&D, were organized. And so I got in contact with them, together with Marco Maggi, my co-designer, that we met in secondary school. So we've been working together since almost more than 30 years now. Wow. So, yeah. And so it was a passion that we always had, a passion that was more than just a hobby. That was something that we were really interested in. And this led us to start working with a studio that, of course, revolved around Alex Randolph, that was called Studio Jockey. It was probably one of the few professional game design studios that existed at the time. They were dealing with all types of games, from card games and stuff for newspapers, like crosswords and stuff like that. So I started working with them to actually present their games at the Nuremberg Game Fair, one of the most important game fairs for board games, especially in the world. And so I started traveling with them to Germany to present their games. And then, having given them this additional skill set in the studio, so being proficient with role-playing games, they decided to try and propose a role-playing game to a big company, to a big publisher in Italy. And that was it, because in 1993, we signed our first contract for a professional game, and that was Lex Arcana, that, as we speak, another coincidence, is just debuting its second Kickstarter for a couple of supplements. So as we're talking, it just started. It just went online.
Oh, congratulations.
In its second edition that happened 25 years later, the first edition.
Oh, and I thought that the One Ring was a long story, because I understand the One Ring, its second edition has been something that has been in production hell for almost a decade. And I know you've been trying to get this started off. I've been reading about the adventure with the Moria campaign, and now finally you found this home with Free League. How did that come to be? Because we've loved Free League. I personally love their production quality. They easily put out books that are above and beyond what everyone else is looking. So to see Lord of the Rings, which aesthetically also has that quality to it when it comes to the fantasy genre, to be partnered, it just felt like when this was announced, it was like, oh, this is perfect. It's such a good match. How did that happen? Because it just seems so, I'm just so happy it did.
Well, I was very much in your position when I was considering the fate for the One Ring second edition, because I was a fan of Free League. I was playing Forbidden Lands. I was collecting most of their stuff, like Tales from the Loop. So I was, as you are, in love with everything connected to Free
Right
League.
down to the cardstock that they choose, the paper that they put into the books. It's just as a tactile experience.
Yeah, and also from a designer point of view, they're attempting different things. They're making games that are actually done to be played. They're not simply published to be sold as a sort of a collector thing. They're actually games done for the gamer.
Yeah, there's a very, in the same way that there's a tactile experience with the book, there's a tactile experience in the story. The way Free League or the way Forbidden Lands handles its health through statistics, losing it and having the dice pool, the stress die in Alien to help amplify the horror of that game, the way Tales from the Loop handles mysteries and unfolding those riddles. There are mechanics in the game, but they corral you or draw you into thinking about the world that you're playing in that really helps tell those stories.
Yeah, that's exactly what we thought, and that's why we were attracted to the company in the first place. Because between Lex Arcana that I told you about 25 years ago and the One Ring today, and the One Ring back when it was first published in 2011, me and Marco, we designed mainly board games because the market at the time shifted. In the mid-90s, late 90s, it was not that interesting to work as a role-playing game.
Yeah, there's no money in tabletop. Yeah.
Exactly. So there was more money in tabletop. We were anyway gamers. We were interested in board games anyway, so we went there. And I don't know if you know it, but our best-selling design to this time is War of the Ring. That is a big, big strategy game on the Lord of the Rings. Again, that was published first in 2004, and that's been on the market for 16 years and still selling very well. But, with board games, you learn something. The rules are the game. Because for board games, it's 100% sure, but it should be also for role-playing games. You cannot simply attach any type of rules to a role-playing game and just pretend it's fine. There is a difference between a game that is built around a game mechanic and something that is simply tacked on. So when we came back to role-playing games in 2011 to start working on the One Ring, what we knew, what we already internalized by working in board games was that what the experience of the game will be dictated by the gameplay experience. It's not that anything goes because it's the Lord of the Rings and people will buy it anyway. No, if you want the game to stay on the market, to be to see actual play for a long time, you are going to give them something different. And that's why we spent a long time in developing the mechanics for the One Ring and studying the books. We were already proficient because, of course, we made already games on the Lord of the Rings, like War of the Ring. But so we were very much in deep in that scholarship, so to speak.
It does sound interesting because board games, they have a victory condition to them. It's much more of a game than tabletop RPGs, which from your days, you're mentioning talking about playing Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s and doing tournaments. That was a time where D&D was very much also a game where you were up against the dungeon master. You had a challenge to overcome. But that is just one way of playing RPGs. And especially in the past decade, I've seen a real shift towards collaborative storytelling and sitting around and being part of the world building and being able to inhabit these characters and get to experience these stories. And that's very different from a board game experience. A lot of these can create those stories, but I don't think at its core that's the intention of many of those board games compared to coming and playing a tabletop RPG. And you were mentioning in one of your updates about the previous versions of the One Ring and the new version being worked on now, of you working out what you called the fiddly bits of the One Ring and helping to streamline that experience. And is that a little bit what we're talking about right now, about that mechanic game experience with the One Ring?
Yes. Just let me go a little bit back on what you said about the difference between board games and role-playing games, but I go to the point that you are raising now, because I've never been interested in games for the sake of winning them. I think this comes from my experience as a role player first, and then a board gamer second. So, and also I come from board games like war games that are mainly aimed at reconstructing an historical event, not simply at putting you and your opponent on even ground and see who wins. So for me, the gaming experience is always that. an experience. I want to feel something when I play the game. I don't want it to be a struggle of, my mind against yours to see who's the best tactician and stuff like that. I want to live the experience of the game. So, for example, to go back to one of our designs, War of the Ring. War of the Ring is a big and involving game that can last for hours, depends on how much you are proficient with that, but how well you know the game and the rules and so on. But it takes you on a trip to Middle-earth. So a lot of players are saying that, I'm playing the game, and if I win or lose, it doesn't matter because I am living an alternate version of the books anyway, regardless of me winning or not. So I came to role-playing games with that in mind. I want to give you an experience through the rules, not simply because you come already with a baggage of loving Middle-earth or the Lord of the Rings. So, I think coming back to why I mentioned fiddliness and stuff, because I think that fiddliness in general with every type of game design is the obstacle that prevents you as a player to really profit at the maximum level of the experience of the game. Because if you think too much about rules, because you keep forgetting something, that's the fiddliness of a game. If I keep forgetting to apply a modifier to some role because it doesn't feel natural to me.
We have to open up the book and flip to page 156 to find out how grappling handles, and now you're not doing the story anymore. You're spending the next 20 minutes negotiating the rules. And the game has stopped.
Takes you away from feeling the game and the storytelling experience, and that's it. That kills the game, kills
it breaks the immersion. Out. It draws you out. Mm-hmm. It brings your heartbeat back down to a resting state, and you lose the moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's why I don't agree with the conclusion that somebody comes to when they say that rules in a role-playing game should disappear. They should disappear, but it doesn't mean they're not there. The rules need to be there to bring you to a place and then eventually disappear, but you cannot simply play any role-playing game as it was the same role-playing game. So what we did way back in first edition, and we tried to improve with second edition, is to give you the mechanics that make you feel that you're playing the One Ring and you're not playing another game, but without making you feel like there are obstacles between you and the enjoyment of the game. That's the polishing that we did in the last period of time.
As we're talking about the One Ring now, and we've talked now about the mechanics and how to uplift the story, what are some of those core principles that make a Lord of the Rings RPG a Lord of the Rings RPG? What are some of those bits of that story and that experience that you feel that the mechanics and the rules you've been massaging are helping to amplify? I did notice one of the things mentioned in the Kickstarter details was a hope mechanic. And it got me. I know listeners of our podcast were talking on our Discord channel of their hope of having something about corruption or the way darkness is dealt with in Lord of the Rings, like thinking of someone like Gollum and how the ring corrupted him over time, or the King of Rohan, and those stories where that darkness kind of creeps in through the edges and eventually takes over. Is that what I'm reading when I see the hope mechanic?
Yes, of course. That's one of the various elements that tell you that you're playing a role-playing game on the Lord of the Rings and not on something else. And this comes from a huge work that we did, a sort of groundwork that can be, if you want, seen as a similar process that Tolkien himself, without sounding presumptuous, did with the books. The author started from language, and language is very much the foundation of the whole Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit. And this was done apart from his love of language and whatever. And so, but in general, what makes The Lord of the Rings different from another fantasy book is that it feels real, and it feels real because it is coherent, and the names are all coherent with one another, and the language sounds right. And so that's a sort of a level of detail that, if you want, can be considered almost invisible, but is actually there. You don't realize it, but it makes the whole thing feel real. So what we did with the game was to examine and use words to create, for example, the different characteristics of the characters in the game to be completely coherent with Tolkien's vocabulary. So there are all the names of the skills, the different abilities, everything is derived from the stories. I can just make an example that the fan of the game know, but the main attributes of your characters are strength, heart, and wits. So basically physical proficiency and your personality and strength of character and intelligence and stuff like that. So 3 aspects. They come from a sentence by Gandalf that, when talking to Frodo, he says, on your adventure, you will need all your strength, heart, and wits to succeed. And that can be applied to basically every word in the supplement, in the core rules. And what I find really satisfactory from my point of view is that when people play the game and then they go back to the stories, they read the book, they recognize the words in a different context because they were playing the books. So when they play the game and they hear words like valor and wisdom and hope and strength, heart, and wits and riddle, all the skills names that we have there, they are continuously repeated in the books themselves. So you, in a way, you visualize the books as if you were playing them after having played the One Ring. So that's one of the things that I think, it was very difficult to pull off, of course, because it was a very deep thing to accomplish. Also, if you take into consideration that I am not a native English speaker, so and the game is written in English, and the other things, going more into the specific mechanics of the game, if you want, the One Ring revolves around 3 main pillars, and these are combat, journeys, and council. It was interesting to see that the D&D went on talking about some pillars of adventure in an edition of D&D that came after the One Ring. I don't know.
Yeah,
if it's
I was about to. It made me think they do also call it pillars, and I believe their pillars are exploration, social, and combat. And you also mentioned with favored and ill-favored roles predate the advantage and disadvantage roles by quite a while in Dungeons and Dragons. Another feather in your cap.
Yeah, I don't mean. I mean, I've been told that possibly. I've been told by someone of the collaborators of the previous publisher that knew, I think, Mike Merles possibly from D&D, that had the idea of using that in D&D, but I wouldn't be surprised.
It's hard to prove. Sometimes a good idea is just a good idea, and the telephone was invented at the same time 5 different places around the world. But in any case, there's no point nor any interest in finding who did it first, because when you design a game, you're always borrowing stuff from other games, of course.
So it's
just nice to see that
natural.
These are good ideas, and if we're all using these good ideas, I think we're all just playing better games.
Absolutely, yeah. We have to learn from other experiences.
Of course, there is always that sense of irony that Dungeons and Dragons, from its inception, was inspired by places like Lord of the Rings, and now Lord of the Rings having a role-playing game. It does feel like one big circle that we're all going there and back again to take another
absolutely
there. Francesco, I really want to thank you for the time you've spent with me. It wasn't enough. There's so much more I would want to dive into it, but I am wishing you all the best with this Kickstarter. At the time you and I are talking, we're right in the middle of it, right in the smack middle. And what I mentioned when we started, I think it's gone up another like $5,000 and another 2,000 just ticked in. So if there's a chance for you to follow along, listener, the link to the Kickstarter is in the show notes of this interview, where you can join in and join me in playing the One Ring when it comes out, hopefully later this year or early 2022. Francesco, is there any parting words you have of what we can look forward to as the One Ring transitions from Kickstarter to physical second edition book in our hands? What can we look forward to? And where should we follow up beyond just Kickstarter to stay in touch with you and with the work that you're involved in?
Well, you can follow the company on their forums. They have a dedicated forum for the One Ring. That we also have a dedicated number of followers that are following us since first edition, and we're crossing their fingers that something like this happened at some point, because of course there were multiple delays and problems that luckily finally, as you said, have been very well overcome. But I think that the parting words that mostly everyone that knows about the One Ring wants to hear is that Moria is coming. So it's not like before, like too far away. It's being designed. So one of the things that will happen is a big supplement on Moria coming from Gareth Anran, who is a beloved writer, already known by the fans of the One Ring.
I'm very excited. There is in the Kickstarter page, there is a letter from Balin to Bilbo Bilbo to Balin, declining his invitation to join him on retaking Moria. and instead, perhaps there are some young hobbits that are living in the Shire that would like to take up on that adventure instead. And it's setting those early bits. And I'm very, as much as I'm looking forward to the game, I am just as much looking forward to the book and the lore and the writing and the art that's going to be included into it. It's going to be really fun to get to return to Middle Earth and also to arrive in it for the first time in such a way. Francesco, best of wishes in the next 16 days of the Kickstarter, and I hope we get to speak again soon as the One Ring continues to develop.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Francesco Nepitello for spending time with me to talk about the One Ring RPG. The Kickstarter is happening right now, so check the show notes. There's a link to their page, and you can go check it out and see that pretty collector edition book they've got, little gold fleck, and can you tell I've already backed it myself. And of course, special thanks to Freely Games for helping to connect us to be able to have this conversation in the first place. Really appreciate it. To stay up to date with the Terrible Warriors, be sure to follow us on Twitter @Dice Warriors, or hey, check out terriblewarriors.com. I've done a little bit of work to the site. I spruced it up, repainted the walls. How do you like the place? I hope I keep it clean for you. We've also got a Discord channel where you can come and join us and hang out. We are right now ranting about the Yakuza games and all of our predictions about WandaVision. You know, the huge. And if you like what you're hearing and you'd like us to do more, this show is only possible because of the support on our Patreon page, patreon.com/terriblewarriors, where every month I host private games with some of our Patreon supporters, and you can join in on those games. There's still time to sign up for this month as well, where I believe we've decided we're going to give a crack at Nibiru, the RPG we covered a few episodes back on Session 0. So why don't you come and recover some memories with us this month, and I'd love to meet you and roll some dice with you. We'll be back next week with another story or an interview or an examination. I don't know. I'm kind of making it up as I go along. Can you tell? But until that time, when we all get to sit around a table and talk passionately about our various fandoms, be good to each other. Bye.